On my wedding day, I saw my mafia fiancé entering the church hand in hand with the lover, him and me the real bride. I was prevented from entering by his men standing outside in the rain, with a dress completely waterlogged. Through the iron gates, Ryder Tail looked at me coldly. Emilia, the family tell you needs an heir. The son that Carmela carries is worth more than you. At that moment, all underworld was waiting to see me fall apart, because everyone knew I loved Hyde 10 years ago. For him I broke up with my own family. He threw bullets and helped put him on top of the mafia. Everyone thought I would fall at his feet one more time, crying, imploring to go back. But nobody knew that an hour before the ceremony starts, I had already agreed to marry another man. That same night I took a jet private towards, and who was waiting for me there. He was the most dangerous man in the entire European underworld. The gift of the Victoria family. Zai Victoria, after that day, disappear, completely gives Raider Conti life. Until 3 years later, I came back to Nilvulha, and next to my husband and our son, and the man who once abandoned me because of his mistress, had the courage to play a recording contract in my face in front of everyone, since finally decided to go back and lower your head. Great. Carmela's son is in need of a nanny. From now on you will take care of him. What Ryder still didn't know was that now across the underworld, everyone bowed their heads when they saw me, and they called me owner. The wind was blowing violently on the airport runway. Ride in particular was stopped next to a black Cadillac surrounded by men. Tattooed in the hands held a written sign, "Treasure my nickname." The affectionate way you come out used to call me. The instant he saw me get off the Ryder plane, froze for a second, then let out a mocking smile. I knew sooner or later you would end up coming back to beg for me. The men around started laughing. Look at her clothes. Nor mark has point should be bought on Camelo. I wonder if she's working on cleaning the airport. I lowered my eyes to the dress. Black silk I wore, a made-to-measure piece by one of the greatest craftsmen in Italy. But men like them ever would recognize true elegance. At that moment Raider's cell phone rang. Was Carmela. As soon as found out that I would be her son's nanny was practically euphoric. Emilia, you should thank the Ryder Point, a woman who disappeared. For 3 years he must not have had a very good life period. At least now he will return to live with his family. Count the same voice. The same disgusting arrogance. Nothing had changed. The henchman. Things to encourage too. Come on, thanks to the boss. Working on the tails is already more than you deserve. I passed my fingers slowly by the ring hidden over the sleeve. I was about to reveal who he really was, but Raider spoke again, in that tone of who was doing charity. I'll give you one last chance. Period. Lower your head. Admit you've made a mistake and take care of Carmela's son. Point, maybe I forgive you. At that moment, I almost laughed. Until today he thought he was leaving me on the altar, and marrying the mistress had been just a sacrifice needed by the family, and that I would continue to love him forever. What a pity the boy who went through a storm, carrying me on my back to buy medicine, had died a long time ago. I took the money he offered me and threw it all on the floor. Notes flew down the runway with the wind. I looked directly into his eyes. Sorry, Sir Count. I don't accept alms from strangers. Ryder's face immediately darkened. He held my wrist tightly and growled between the teeth. Strange. After 10 years in my bed, now I'm a stranger. I put my arm out of his hand. We broke up a long time ago. And another, my husband is extremely possessive. Point, so don't touch me. Ryden was in Berlin for a second before falling into the laughter. Husband, what? You married some poor guy. It was obvious he didn't believe in me. Then continued. Full of you. In 3 days the charity ball will take place. Of the 5 families Vittoria points will be there. I will show you what really powerful people are. I almost thought it was funny because that event had been organized by Zai especially to celebrate my pregnancy. Before getting in the car I looked at Ryder for the last time. Hope that in 3 days you still be so confident. 3 days later, I arrived at the ball wearing a black dress, personally chosen by Zai. As soon as I entered the hall, Ryden saw me. His eyes even shone for a moment, probably thinking that I had finally returned. Toida, since you came, stay by my side and behave. He analyzed me from top to bottom with more reactions. You keep dressing like a poor. Ignore completely passed straight through it and walked to the main table. From the hall, the only empty place was right next to Zai. Ryder lost color at the same time, went crazy. That's the Vittori family table. At that moment, Carmela appeared on top of a very high jump. As soon as you saw the ring on my hand, widened his eyes and started screaming. Everyone, look at this. Slut is using a copy of the ring. Lily blood of Vittori. The whole hall turned to look at me. That ring was the greatest symbol of power in the Vittori family. and it had been put on my finger by dayI himself. Carmela became even more. Security. How did they let this garbage in here? So she moved on to rip my ring off. In the midst of the confusion, someone pushed me. I lost my balance and fell violently to the ground. The next second, Carmela's thin jump crushed my left hand. The pain was so severe that my whole body shook. Blood began to flow through my fingers, smearing the red ruby of the ring. I my belly enduring the pain, and tried to talk. For I am dayI's wife. The slap went through my face. Fuck's mouth. Do you really think you deserve to mention his name? Then the doors of the hall opened. The whole environmented into silence. dayI Vittoria slowly entered the hall, carrying our son in his arms. Ryder impaled down on time. Instinctively tried to hide behind him. Damn, dayI has reached the point he doesn't make a scandal now. But the next second, little Lucas struggled in his father's lap wanting. Come down as soon as you touch the ground. Ran off with short legs towards me, and threw herself into my arms crying. Mommy, the whole hall froze. dayI's look finally. Cloud over my bloody hand. The air seemed to stop. After Lucas' voice echoes through the hall. No one had the courage to breathe. All the color disappeared from dayI's face. Slowly looked up. Faced directly. Carmela's jump still pressed against my hand. The ambient temperature seemed to plummet. So he started walking towards us. Step by step and freeing all the mobsters. Gifts lowered their heads automatically. Because everyone knew that when the gift of the Victory family stayed really furious, was when he got scariest. Carmela began to tremble. Then I didn't know who she was. But then he didn't even let her finish. He took it slowly. The black gloves and knelt before me. His fingers touched my hand, aided with extreme care. The voice came out low, cold. Mortal. Who touched you? Before I could answer, Lucas pointed to Carmela with eyes full of tears. It was that bad woman. She hurt mommy. Boom. Carmela's legs gave way at the same time. She fell sitting on the floor, completely terrified. And it was at that moment that Ryden finally understood. The woman, he is garbage. Now he was someone that no one in every underworld dared to provoke. But his true despair was yet to come. Because the next second, dayI looked up at Ryden and calmly asked, so it was you that I wanted to transform? My wife and her lover's child's nanny? The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, heavy enough to crush the breath out of every mob boss, capo and assassin present. dayI Vittoria didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even draw a weapon. He merely knelt there on the cold marble, gently holding my bloodied hand as if it were the most fragile, sacred artifact in the world. Yet the air in the room felt like it had dropped below freezing. So it was you, dayI repeated, his voice a low, terrifying vibration that echoed against the vaulted ceilings, that wanted to transform my wife into your lover's child's nanny. Ryden Conti looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine that had already clicked. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The mocking arrogance he had carried at the airport, the sickening superiority, it was entirely gone, replaced by a primal, suffocating terror. Don Vittori, Ryden finally choked out, his voice cracking like a dying man's. He instinctively took a step back. I didn't know. There must be a misunderstanding. Emilia. Emilia is. You will not speak her name, dayI interrupted smoothly. He didn't look at Ryden. His dark, fathomless eyes were fixed entirely on my ruined hand. The red ruby of the Vittori matriarch ring was smeared with my blood. dayI exhaled slowly, and the sound made the hardened criminals in the back of the room flinch. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a pristine, black silk handkerchief. With agonizing care, he began to wrap it around my bleeding fingers. Does it hurt, Mia Regina? He whispered, his tone shifting into something terrifyingly tender, meant only for me. Only a little. I lied softly, my free hand instinctively resting over my slightly rounded stomach. The sharp, shooting pain in my hand was secondary to the fierce protectiveness I felt for the life growing inside me. dayI's gaze flicked to my stomach, and a muscle feathered in his jaw. He knew the fall could have threatened our unborn child. He stood up slowly in one fluid motion, lifting me into his arms as easily as if I weighed nothing. I buried my face in his neck, breathing in the scent of bergamot and gun oil. Little Lucas clung to his father's pant leg, glaring at Carmela with all the fiery malice a 3-year-old Vittori could muster. Carmela was still on the floor. The moment her brain finally processed exactly who she had just maimed, her entire body began to convulse with violent tremors. She looked down at her bloody stiletto, then up at dayI, her eyes bulging with raw horror. Please, Carmela sobbed, crawling backward like a wounded animal. Please, I didn't know. Ryden told me she was nobody. He told me she was trash. Please. Don Vittori, Zai didn't even grant her the dignity of his gaze. He simply turned to his second-in-command, Dante, a giant of a man whose face was mapped with pale scars. She used her right foot to step on my wife, Zai stated, his voice devoid of any human emotion. Take both of them. Let her keep the shoes. Carmela didn't even have time to scream. Two of Zai's men moved with terrifying speed. They dragged her by her hair toward the center of the hall. The sickening crack of heavy iron batons shattering her ankles echoed like gunshots in the silent room. Carmela's piercing shriek ripped through the air, tearing at the opulent atmosphere of the charity ball. Blood pooled on the polished marble. Raiden flinched, instinctively reaching toward his waist, but stopped cold. A dozen laser sights from the upper balconies were already painted on his chest and forehead. You, Zai said, finally looking at Raiden. The look in the Don's eyes was not anger. It was a promise of total, absolute annihilation. You left her in the rain. You thought you broke her. You thought you could throw her away and keep the empire she built for you. Raiden's breath hitched. Don Vittori, we are part of the 5 families. There are rules. The commission. I am the commission, Zai said softly. The Conti family is no longer recognized. You have exactly 24 hours to watch everything you love burn. Zai turned on his heel, holding me securely against his chest. Let's go home. Emilia. The trash is starting to smell. The private wing of the Vittori hospital was quiet. I lay on the crisp white sheets, my hand freshly stitched and cast in a lightweight splint. The doctors had run a full ultrasound. The baby was perfectly fine, resting safely within me. Zai sat by the edge of the bed, his large hands gently encasing my uninjured one. He hadn't slept. The harsh lines of his face were illuminated by the dim bedside lamp, casting shadows over his sharp jawline. I should have killed him in the hall, Zai murmured, his thumb stroking my knuckles. I should have put a bullet between his eyes the moment you fell. Death is too easy for a man like Raiden, I replied quietly, looking up at the ceiling. 10 years ago, I dragged him out of the gutter. I bled for him. I took bullets for him. I manipulated the entire eastern seaboard's trade routes to seat him at the table. He thought he was a king, Zai. He never realized I was the one holding the crown. Zai's lips curved into a dark, predatory smile. He knows now. I don't want him just dead, Zai, I said, turning my head to meet my husband's eyes. I want him hollowed out. I want him to feel exactly what I felt standing outside that church in the rain. I want him to have absolutely nothing. Zai kissed my forehead, his lips warm and lingering. Consider it done, Mia. Regina. Sleep now. By the time you wake up, the Conti name will be a ghost. The purge was swift, silent, and absolute. It didn't start with violence. It started with the money. Raiden Conti woke up the next morning to find his bank accounts frozen. The offshore trusts in the Caymans, the shell companies in Switzerland, the cryptocurrency wallets, all of them evaporated into thin air. Zai's hackers, backed by the infinite resources of the Vittori Empire, didn't just drain the accounts, they erased the digital footprint of the Conti family entirely. Then came the allies. Raiden frantically called the heads of the Russian Bratva, the Irish syndicates in Boston, and the Colombian cartels. Every single one of them hung up on him. Word had spread through the global underworld like wildfire. The Conti family had touched the wife of the Vittori Don. To associate with Raiden was a death sentence. By noon, the physical dismantling began. Raiden's casinos were raided by anonymous tactical teams. His underground fighting rings were torched. His supply lines from the docks were severed. His capos and lieutenants, the very men who had laughed at me at the airport, were found hanging by their feet from the steel girders of their own warehouses, missing their tongues. Raiden sat in his penthouse in absolute disbelief. The empire he thought he had built over a decade was crumbling in mere hours. Boss. One of his last remaining guards burst into the study, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. They're at the gates. The Vittori men. They aren't even sneaking in, they're just walking through the front door. The police aren't coming. We have to run. Raiden looked at the guard, then looked at the heavy gold ring on his finger, the signet of the Conti boss. His hands were trembling violently. The reality of what he had thrown away crashed down upon him. Emilia wasn't just a scorned woman. She was the architect of his life, and now she was the architect of his demise. Where is Carmela? Raiden demanded, his voice thin and reedy. She left, boss, the guard stammered. 2 hours ago. She took the kid, and whatever cash was in the vault. She slipped out through the service elevator, she said. She said what? Raiden roared, throwing a crystal whiskey decanter against the wall. She said she was going to offer herself to the Vittori men in exchange for her life. She said she'd tell them all your secrets if they let her go. Raiden collapsed into his leather chair, the fight completely draining from his body. The woman he had abandoned Emilia for. The woman whose child he had chosen. Over the woman who had built him. At the first sign of a storm, Carmela hadn't stood by him. She had run, leaving him to drown. 3 days later, the weather in the city had turned foul. A torrential downpour lashed against the asphalt, turning the streets into slick, black mirrors. I stood under the vast awning of the Victoria State's iron gates, wrapped in a thick, luxurious cashmere coat I had draped over my shoulders. Lucas was inside by the fireplace, safe and warm. I stood a few feet behind me, a silent, lethal guardian in the shadows, allowing me the space to finish what had started 3 years ago. Through the heavy rain, a figure stumbled up the long driveway. He had no umbrella. His clothes, once tailored, $1,000 Italian suits, were torn, soaked, and caked in mud. His face was bruised, gaunt, his eyes wide with the manic desperation of a hunted animal. He had been running for 3 days. No sleep, no food. Everyone he knew was dead or had betrayed him. Raiden Conti fell to his knees in the puddles just inches from the iron gates. He looked up, the rain plastering his hair to his skull. When he saw me standing there, dry, immaculate, radiating the absolute authority of the underworld's true queen, a choked sob ripped from his throat. "Emilia," he gasped, crawling forward and wrapping his bleeding hands around the cold iron bars of the gate. "Emilia, please." I looked down at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hatred. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical disgust. 3 years ago, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the sound of the rain. I stood outside a church in a dress that was ruined by the storm. I begged the guards to let me in. I just wanted to ask you why. Why after everything I did for you, you chose her? I was stupid, Raiden cried, pressing his face against the bars. I was a fool. She manipulated me. The family told me we needed an heir quickly, and she was pregnant. It meant nothing, Emilia. I always loved you. It was always you. Don't insult my intelligence, I said softly. Carmela didn't manipulate you. Your own ego did. You couldn't handle the fact that every boss in the city knew I was the brains behind your operation. You wanted a woman who looked up to you like a god, not a woman who stood beside you as an equal. You chose a parasite because she made you feel tall. Raiden wept openly, the rain washing the tears and dirt down his cheeks. Please forgive me. Remember the old days, Emilia? Remember when I carried you through the storm to get your medicine when we had nothing? I'm still that boy. I can change. Just tell him to call off the hit. Tell Don Vittori to let me live. I'll leave the country. I'll disappear. I stared at the pathetic creature groveling at my feet. The boy who carried me through the storm died the moment you locked those church doors, I said, my voice devoid of mercy. And as for Carmela, did you? No. Raiden blinked, confused through his panic. No what? Carmela didn't make it very far, I said casually, adjusting my coat. She went to the Russian syndicate to sell your ledgers. But she didn't realize the Russians' answer to my husband now. They handed her over. During her interrogation, she confessed everything. I leaned slightly closer to the gate, locking my eyes onto his. The child she carries. The son you threw me away for? He isn't yours, Raiden. She was sleeping with your underboss for a year before your wedding. You destroyed your life, your empire, and me for another man's bastard. The words hit him harder than a physical blow. Raiden let go of the bars, falling backward into the mud. He stared into space, his mind utterly shattering. Under the weight of the revelation, the empire was gone. The woman he chose was a traitor. The child was a lie. He had nothing. He was nothing. You told me at the airport to lower my head and admit my mistakes. I whispered, the finality in my voice ringing like a bell tolling the end. Look at you now, Raiden. You are exactly where you belong. In the dirt. I turned my back on him. Emilia. Wait. Emilia. Raiden screamed, scrambling back to the gate, a sudden, desperate rage taking over his broken mind. He reached into his ruined jacket and pulled out a snub-nosed revolver he had managed to hide. If I go down, you're coming with me. He aimed the gun through the bars. He didn't even get to pull the hammer back. A suppressed thwip sounded from the shadows behind me. Raiden froze. A neat, dark hole appeared directly in the center of his forehead. The gun slipped from his limp fingers, clattering against the iron gate. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed face first into the muddy puddle, motionless. I didn't even flinch. I kept walking up the pristine marble steps of the estate. Zai stepped out of the shadows, smoothly lowering his silenced weapon. He didn't spare a second glance at the corpse outside his gates. He walked up the steps, behind me, draping a warm arm around my waist, pulling me firmly against his solid chest. Are you cold? he asked, pressing a kiss to my temple, his thumb brushing over my cheek. Not anymore, I answered, leaning into his touch. The Conti family is erased, I murmured against my hair. Carmela is boarding a one-way freighter to a labor camp in Siberia. The boy was sent to an orphanage in deeply rural Italy, far away from this life. It is finished. I looked out over the sprawling, manicured lawns of the Vittoria estate, feeling the gentle kick of the new life inside me. The storm outside was raging, but inside these walls, I was untouchable. I was no longer the naive girl who loved a boy who didn't deserve her. I was the wife of the most dangerous man in Europe. I was the mother of the Vittoria heir. I was the queen of the underworld. And my reign had just begun. So I took my uninjured hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, the heavy Vittori rings clicking together in the quiet night. Let's go back inside, I said, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. Lucas is waiting for his bedtime story. Together, we walked through the heavy oak doors, shutting out the rain, the past, and the ghosts of dead men forever.